Hey everybody, my name is Lauren Davis, and I have the honor and the joy of serving on staff here at Wichita First Church. Wherever you're joining us from, I just want to say thanks for being here. This past Sunday, we talked about the direction that we need to aim our lives. Specifically, Pastor Scott highlighted the difference between childish and childlike, and what actual moves we need to make to live a life of love. I hope you enjoy this message. Thanks for joining us.
The teaching text for today is 1 Corinthians 13, 8 through 13. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated.
No big deal, but my aim over the next 30 minutes is simply to reframe your entire fundamental life narrative for the sake of the salvation of Western society and all future generations. No big deal. I'm really serious about that. Let me start here. Let me ask you a question. What is it, do you know, what is it that you're supposed to aim your life at in order to grow up? And if you know what that thing is, how do you know when it is that you've actually grown up? Do you have a sense of the aim or the direction of your life? Where are you headed? And do you know where you are? Now, when someone goes through difficulty or they come out of some travail in their life and they come out better, we actually have language for that. We say about that person, woman or man, we say, well, oh, she's grown, or he's grown. What happened to them when they went through that experience? Well, it references the process of growing up, doesn't it? You know, that's how it works, is that you fundamentally change states when you grow up. So someone who knew you when you were 8 and maybe loved you, and then maybe you move away, and then you see them when you're 28, and it takes them a minute, like, who are you again? And they look at you, why? What's happened? You've changed your state. Well, the same thing that happens to you physically by the virtue of the passage of time is supposed to happen to you mentally and emotionally and spiritually. But here's what I know. Often, very often, people get stuck. And I'm telling you, it honestly doesn't matter the decade. This is not a message for teenagers or people in their 20s or 30s. I've seen people in every decade get stuck because life has so many transitions that it's easy to get stuck in one of those transitions. The psychologist, Carl Jung, he said something, this is not a message about Carl Jung, but this is poignant. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, you'll get stuck in places and you won't know how to grow past them. That's kind of the definition of not growing up, is that you get stuck and that you don't grow. You don't know what the aim is of your life, and you don't know where you are. The Apostle Paul's language in 1 Corinthians 13 for that entire experience is, and it's kind of insulting, is childish things. Now, this is a series we're in called Unstuck, and we're talking about the common places that we get stuck for two reasons. Number one, I want you to know that you're not alone. So if you go through some difficulty and you go, well, no one else is struggling with that. No, these are the common places that all of us get stuck at one point or another. I want you to know that you're not alone, but then I also want you to see that you can get unstuck, that God's grace can help you to get unstuck. And so we've been saying that one of the primary ways that God's grace helps us to get unstuck is by giving us a bigger vision for our life. And the bigger vision that we've been talking about is that you and I would be holy people. And if you were here a couple weeks ago, you know we talked about the fact from the book of Hebrews that means it's a person who's at peace. They're full of grace. They're not bitter. It's a vision of your transformation. I want to talk to you about that this morning. Now, we have a value as a church, and we're reading it every week, but I want you to read it out loud because I think it's important. Would you read this out loud with me? Ready? Here we go. We believe in transformation. God's grace means you aren't stuck, and there's always more to come. So I want to talk to you about three things. The child, what do you need to let go of? The definition, what's the definition of growing up? And the man or the woman that you are meant to be, how do you become it? Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. What is it that you need to let go of, regardless of the season that you're in or the decade of your life that you're in? This is maybe 1 Corinthians 13, maybe one of the most famous passages in the Bible. Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Matthew chapter 6, the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And then this chapter right here, 1 Corinthians 13. Now, if you've grown up in church, you've heard this read many times. If you have not, where have you heard this read before? Almost always where? Right? Where is it? Weddings, right? Yeah, right. So here's what we do. We hear a passage like 1 Corinthians 13. We hear it at a wedding. That's the setting of the context. And so we assume this is a picture of a sentimental kind of love. And so here's what we do. Out of hand, we go, isn't that nice at that wedding, that young couple, they married each other and they're supposed to say all those things. And we walk away and we dismiss it as something that's impractical. Now, 1 Corinthians 13 is a part of a letter the Apostle Paul wrote to Christians in ancient Corinth. Corinth was a very, very wealthy city. It was on an isthmus, so it was a little strip of land, and so you had to pass through. It became one of the most important and wealthy cities in the Roman Empire, and it was a city where there were very successful people, very gifted people, very ambitious people. They accomplished a lot. I've seen renderings of what the city looked like. It was just an absolutely beautiful place. They were famous for the Corinthian Games that the Olympic Games are based off of, and Paul references that in the letter. And so we're reading a part of a letter that he wrote to a group of people who were very, very successful, brilliant, bright, and that he started a church there. And this entire letter, if you read through the whole letter, what you discover is that he's actually telling them all the way through the letter to these successful people with money, with status, with acclaim across the entire Roman Empire. He's basically telling them throughout the entire letter, hey, you're still childish. You don't know the aim of your life, and you don't know where you are. And then he gets to 1 Corinthians 13, this thing that we only think applies to couples that are getting married. And it's basically a list of what they were not doing. Now, if you go through and you read verses 4 to 7, which we'll read here in just a minute, and he says, love is not self-seeking, it's not rude. These are words he's used earlier in the letter. And so when everyone got to 1 Corinthians 13, the first readers of the letter, I promise you they were not inspired. They were insulted. They're like, you're telling me I'm rude and I'm self-seeking? I'm successful. What are you talking about? So I'm going to tell you who this is not written to, okay? This was not written, you can read it at a wedding. I've read it at weddings. It's beautiful. It's not written, though, to people who are getting married, and it's not written to people who are at the beginning of their life. It's actually written to people who've actually accomplished a lot. And it's telling them, in essence, hey, listen, for all of your accomplishments and your sophistication, you're still stuck. You haven't grown up. And you need to let go of some things. So what are we going to need to let go of if we're going to move away from childish things? Well, he gives us two things in this chapter. Right at the beginning, verses 1, 2, and 3, there's this list. And this is I'm going to call it, we have to let go of strategies of establishment, if you're taking notes. Strategies of establishment. What do I mean? Well, these are, in this list here, it's age-old. It's what successful people do. I want you to see if you see this. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. He says, listen, if I speak in the tongue of men or of angels, in other words, if I have eloquence, if everyone, when you speak in whatever setting, goes, wow. Or when you talk, they go, oh, man, that person is a thought leader. They are so eloquent. Have you been around them? Man. In the verse, he says that's a strategy of establishment. Verse 2, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have a faith that can move mountains. What's this? This is insight and belief. So you're the kind of person that when you share your nugget about how this is to work in your industry or leadership, everyone's just like, wow, what an insight. your ability to solve problems. I mean, you're hired or you're brought into places where there are difficult problems and you have the ability to make it work, and everyone's like, man, that guy can just make it happen. Or you're the kind of person who has belief. Like this is actually really big in our culture. If you're a motivational speaker, I'm all for motivational speakers, but you're all about positivity, you're all about what can be done, and I mean, you can make millions of dollars being a person of belief because everybody wants your positivity. What's the secret? How do I get it? And then he goes on, verse 3, and he says, if I give all I possess to the poor and I give my body over to hardship, you're a person, what is this? This is someone who gives. In other words, you do amazing things for people. You write big checks. You work hard and you meet needs, and everyone is awed by your work ethic and the fact that you focus on other people. These are all strategies of establishing yourself, of saying and proving, hey, I've arrived. I've grown up. This is what the big people do, and I am one of them. Now, these things are great as skill development. They're just terrible as identity establishment, and they make for an awfully thin life justification. So the Apostle Paul does something here that's so at odds with how we think that we have to pause and we have to take it in. And I just want to ask you if you would consider that maybe he's actually on to something. Because here's what he says. He says, listen, you can do all of these things that successful and big people do. You can do them all. You can be important. You can be a person who's highly skilled. You can contribute. You can be honored. You can be... you have your skills in demand, but you can do all of that and you can miss the most important thing. And it's almost like he gives this formula. He says, so you can have eloquence, and if you take eloquence and you subtract out of it love, what all you are is you're just noise. And he uses this image of a gong. You know, you've heard a gong, right? How long is it there? As long as you can hear it. And he says, or you have insight and belief, but you subtract out love. He says, you are nothing. Why? Because ideas and beliefs in themselves, they have no substance. They're just, that's all they are. It's just like an idea. It's nothing without love. And then he says, if you were to give everything and sell everything that you have, but you didn't have love, you would actually gain nothing, because what you really wanted was people's approval, and frankly, that's not much. So he says in verses 8 to 10, he says, so where there are prophecies, and he's referencing verse 1, 2, and 3, they're going to cease. Where there are tongues, they'll be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part, what's he say? It disappears. Those strategies of establishment are temporary strategies at best. Now, again, is anything wrong with those things in of themselves? No, they're great things. They just can't establish you. They can't give you a basis for the justification of your existence. And if you think possessing them is the aim of life, well, you will have that if you think the aim of your life is other people's approval and a sense of self-justification. So why, Paul's trying to ask us in this letter, why would we try to establish ourselves with something that's going to disappear? So we have to let go of strategies of establishment. And then he goes on, he says you have to let go of what's childish, not childlike. He says this in verse 11 of chapter 13. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Now you may say, well, didn't Jesus say something about children? Aren't they supposed to be some sort of example to us? Yes, Jesus did say, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus was referencing the innocence and trust of a child. Those of you who have little children at home, you know that you have a teacher in your home on innocence and trust. Right? You know, right? That's not what Paul's talking about. There's a difference between childlike and childish. Because what's childish? What are children? They're inconsistent and they're impulsive. Why? They have no reference point other than themselves. Now, these aren't qualities of evil. These are the qualities of children. There's someone who hasn't grown up yet. Now, again, the section that gets read of this letter is verses 4 to 7, which we didn't read, but he goes on this list of, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, love does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude. Beautiful, beautiful passage. And so here's what I'd like you to do. I took some liberties with the passage, and I changed one of the words. You'll see the words. So I just want all of the teachers, the parents, the pediatricians, anyone who works with children, can you put it on the screen, so stay with me, and I want you to read this out loud. This is going to be so true. You're going to go, oh, absolutely, this is the case. Ready? Here we go. Throw it up there for me. We're waiting, and we're waiting. Oh, we don't have it. Oh, good. That's great. Wonderful moment we were all having right here. I'm going to read it to you, okay? I took some liberties with the passage, and stay with me here. Ready? Children, this is verse 4 and 7. Children are patient. Children are kind. Children do not envy. Children do not boast. They are not proud. Children do not dishonor others. Children are not self-seeking. Children are not easily angered. Children keep no record of wrongs. Children do not delight in evil, but rejoice with the truth. Children always protect. Children always trust. Children always hope. Children always persevere, right? Why did you hear a smattering of laughter in the room? Because all the people who have children know, right? Well, sometimes, but not all the time. And when our children do those things, we go, you know what we say to them? We go, look how grown up you are. But why do we say that? We know that what they're doing, when they do it, it's temporary because they are children. Why? The frame of reference they have for their life is themselves. Children do occasionally what mature people do regularly. So here's what we have to let go of. We have to let go of talking and thinking and reasoning that's focused only on me as the reference point. So what do we have to let go of? Strategies of establishment. What's childish? What's the definition? What do we need to work with? What do we need to aim our life at? How do we know what it is? Well, you need to know the aim. And Paul, in this passage, and you're not surprised to know this, that gives us a one-word definition of what it means to be grown up and what it is we're supposed to aim our life at and measure ourselves against. What's the word? What do you think it is? It's love. Verse 8, he says, love never fails. Love is the aim. Love never fails. It always works. Think about those other things in the strategies of establishment, right? At some point, eloquence, even if you're an eloquent person, at some point your words fail you. If you're a person full of insight, at some point you can't remember your point. You're like, what was it I was thinking? If you're a person with big positivity, with big belief, there are moments in your life when you doubt. If you're a person who gives and works hard, at some point you run out of resource, energy, or money. Those things fall to the ground at some point. And here's what Paul's saying. You aren't the full person you could be, or the whole person you want to be, or the mature person God means you to be, until you are a person of love. Look around you. The mature people, the men, the women, they are the loving people. That's who they are. Now, I get it. You're thinking, wait a second, that sounds really, really good, but you and I both know, Scott, that is not practical. You're talking about something for little children or retired people. This is the real world. Come on. Nobody gets a promotion for being loving. You don't hire people based on how loving they are. That's not how life works, Scott. What are you saying? It just seems like pie in the sky. Well, I think if that's the way you're framing this conversation in your own mind, that you maybe you're not understanding what love is. We use the word love for so many different things that it kind of loses its meaning. You can love your children and you can love your car. Does that mean the same thing? No, it doesn't mean the same thing. Other languages have a multitude of words for love to help us understand the difference, and the Greek language is no different. It had actually 4 words for love, and there's different kinds. There's storge love, which is the family love. Now listen, I know if you have children, and whenever they're fighting, as parents, you want them to get along, right? You want them to love each other, and so you say, can you love your brother, please? And they begrudgingly say, I love you. So let me just give you the Greek word for that kind of love. It's storge. So if you're a student, if you're mad at your brother or sister and your parents try to force you to love your sibling, you can, instead of saying I love you, you can say I storge you, right? That just works. Just make it work. Or there's philia, Philadelphia. It's the love of mutual affection. It's the love of warmth, and it's the love of emotion. It's something you feel about another person. There's the love of the eros love, where we get the word erotic. It's the love of passion and desire. None of those words are what Paul means when he talks about love. So if you think he's talking about passion, desire, emotion, that's not what he says. He uses the word, many of you know this, is the word agape. And agape is the self-forgetful, other-focused love. Here's how agape love works. It's how you treat someone when you don't have emotion or desire. So when I can be for you, even when I don't agree with you, or I think you aren't for me, if in that moment I work for your best interest, that's love. Now, reframe this for a second. If you're saying you don't hire people based on love, let me ask you a question. If you have difficult customers that you deal with in a business or difficult parents in a school, wouldn't you want someone dealing with your most difficult customers or parents who agapes people? Like, wouldn't you almost go, the on-the-job description is you have to be a person of agape love who's able to forget themselves and focus on the other person. I'll hire you, right? It's very practical, isn't it? So now, just do a little exercise here and put your name in that passage from 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, where love is patient. Now, I didn't put it on the screen because I used my name because it's kind of incriminating. I'm afraid my wife and kids will take a picture and say, see, you're not those things. But here it is, right? I want you to think about you. Scott is patient. Scott is kind. Scott does not envy. Scott does not boast. Scott is not proud. Scott does not dishonor others. Scott's not self-seeking. Scott's not easily angered. Scott keeps no record of wrongs. Scott does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Scott always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Ouch. Now, I got some pastoral advice for you at this point that you can take or leave. If you're in a transition point in your life and you don't know what to do next, can I just suggest to you that the thing you might aim your life at is the love that's in 1 Corinthians 13? You can't make what happened go away. You can't make the difficulty disappear. You can't make people say something different about what happened. But you can choose to aim your life in a different direction. And I promise you, you can go no deeper or higher than that kind of love. Now, if you're around here from time to time, you know I talk about the box test. And the box test is the fact that at some point, you are going to be in a room like this, and you're going to be in a box, and everybody else is going to be sitting out there, and you have to think about yourself. Now, what is it that people are going to say about me? I mean, I hope when that day comes, I hope they get up and they say things like, oh, man, he was so eloquent, so insightful, a believer. I mean, his positivity, believed in me, he was a giver. And they reference, the things that you've accomplished in your life. And I just want to ask, is that going to be enough? Is that what you're after? David Brooks, author and columnist, he says that there are two different kinds of virtues, what he calls the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. When you're in that moment, when that moment is happening and you're not hearing it, and other people are saying it, do you want them to read off the resume virtues? He did this, he was this kind of person, wow, what an amazing thing he accomplished here. She's phenomenal, she was unbelievable, I can't believe what she did and accomplished in your life. No, that's nice. What you want is the eulogy virtues. This is the kind of person. She loved me. He went through some incredible difficulties in his life, but somehow he had something that he aimed his life at that pulled him out of the difficulty and made him a person of love. I want to be like him. Right? That's the definition of being grown up, is love. Well, okay, how do you become the man or the woman that Paul says that God intends for you to be, not the child? How do you become that person? What steps do you take? I want to suggest a couple for you. Number one, you're going to have to aim your life toward Jesus' love. Now, we've been talking in this series about holiness, and we've been saying that that's God's intention for your life is that you would be a holy person. Think about the word whole, complete. God is whole, God is complete, and God wants to share with you what God is. Whole, complete, holy. It's a very generous act of God. And the word itself, holy, we talked about it last week, means to be set apart. Well, what are you set apart for? What is that for? And in the scriptures, holiness and love, or agape love, are always linked, because What you're set apart for is to be a person who expresses self-forgetful, sacrificial love to the people around you. That's what you're set apart for. But we got to clear a little bit of clutter out of that because it'll be difficult for you because you'll go, I got to be holy, got to be holy. And there's some word associations that come up with that. And so I'm kind of using this mental image of Holiness Hill, right? What's at the top of Holiness Hill? What's the root meaning of the word holiness? Now, I think what most people think of when they hear the word holiness is they think, oh, I know what's at the top of the hill. It's something like morality and purity. And honestly, we're obsessed with both of those things today. It doesn't matter what side of the spectrum we're on. Everyone is obsessed with their version of what morality is and their version of what purity is, and we're very tribal as a result. So you can and both argue for their version of morality and their version of purity. And listen, you may say, Scott, are you saying we're not to be moral and pure? No. To be holy is definitely to be moral and to be morally pure. Paul writes in Thessalonians, he says, for God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. I mean, there's just a problem of what it does to the heart if at the top of Holiness Hill is morality and purity. Here's what happens when you come down the hill from morality and purity, is you encounter things like control, right? Because, well, if that's what it means to be holy, is to be moral and pure, if that's the definition of what it means, then I guess I have to police other people and how they act. I have to police the people around me and my kids. You encounter things like self-righteousness because you've worked so hard to be like that, and if someone doesn't live up to your standard, it's why religious people are often self-righteous people, is I have to say, well, I worked so hard and you didn't, so you must be less than me. Now, you would never admit that, but that's what you think. You encounter things like tribes and walls, and so it's the people who agree with me about what it's moral and pure, and everybody else is wrong. And you're afraid all the time of screwing up because you're performing out of fear. I'll give you two examples of this. If you say, well, wait a second, Scott. I mean, I don't know. Jesus has this interaction with the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, and he heals this man born blind in John chapter 9. And the Pharisees say something. If I were to lift this quote for you out of the Bible and you didn't know the context, you might go, well, yeah, I think that's true. I think that's an accurate statement. And they get mad at one point. They're mad at this man for being healed. They're mad at Jesus for what he did on the Sabbath day. And this is what they say. Listen, we know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Again, lift that out of context. If someone quotes from the Bible, John 9, verse 31, you might go, well, yeah, that's how it works, right? Moral and pure, it's at the top. You could go to the story of the prodigal son and the older brother. He's all about morality. At the top of Holiness Hill for him is morality and purity. But I want to suggest to you that at the top of Holiness Hill is what Paul says, that it's love is at the top. Agape love. And it's interesting when you come down the hill from love as the zenith of what holiness is. Here's what you encounter. You actually encounter morality, because what's morality? It's about what's good. And out of love, you want what's best for people. And then when you come down, you experience purity, because what's purity? We're obsessed with purity, in all of our products, anything you put on your face, ingest into your body. We don't want to harm anybody, right? Because you want to be pure, because you don't want anyone harmed. Then you encounter things like self-sacrifice, and then you encounter a community of love, because people are working to love each other. And then you find whole people. John Wesley, who we take a lot of our cues from, was an Anglican minister in the 1700s. Many people say that he was responsible for keeping England from having slavery and having a war over slavery, and he was an inspiration to William Wilberforce, and he was, in his day, the most famous man in England. An Anglican clergyman, wrote lots of books. And he started what was known as the Methodist Church, and now through that, the Church of the Nazarene. And he said one time, why is it that God raised us up? And he said, to reform the nation, and in particular the church, to spread scriptural holiness over the land. But I don't want you to miss what Wesley understood was the height, the top of Holiness Hill. Listen to what he said. It's one of my favorite quotes. Love, John Wesley, is the highest gift of God. Humble, gentle, patient love. So that all visions, revelations, or manifestations, whatever, are little things compared to love. And that all other gifts are either the same with or infinitely inferior to love. Therefore, you should be thoroughly aware of this. The heaven of heavens is love. There is nothing higher in religion. There is, in effect, nothing else. If you look for anything but more love, you are looking wide of the mark. You're getting out of the royal way. And when you're asking others, hey, have you received this or that blessing? If you mean anything but more love, you mean wrong. You are leading them out of the way and putting them on a false scent. Settle it then in your heart that from the moment God has saved you from all sin, you are to aim at nothing more but more of that love described in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. You can go no higher than this till you are carried into Abraham's bosom. Isn't that powerful? You have to aim your life at love. The second is you have to practice love as the way. But listen, this is a leadership principle. What you want is the way. It took me a long time to learn this as a leader, but what you want is the way. So if you want a culture of honesty and vulnerability, guess what you have to do? You, as the leader, have to be honest and vulnerable. You can't say, everybody be honest and vulnerable, but I'm not going to be. It applies on anything. What you want is the way. And if you want love, the way that you go is love. Do you see what I'm saying? You practice it every day. You practice love as the way you go. It'd be like if you were going to, be a part of a pie eating contest. How would you practice to win the pie eating contest? What would you do? You would eat a lot of pie. What you want is the way. If you want joy in your life, then do joyful things. If you want love in your life, then act loving. Love is both the path and the end of the path. And how you grow up is by practicing love on a daily basis. You are presented opportunities every day to respond either with emotion, desire, I don't feel like it right now, I don't want to act that way right now, or you can say, you know what, I don't feel a single thing. In fact, I'm kind of mad at this person, but I'm going to act in their best interest anyway. I'm being shaped on the way to love. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be that person who does exactly that. You have to practice love as the way. And then this is the last thing, is you have to be loved as a child. Now, I just question for you, for those of you who have physically grown up, how did you grow up? You were put into a family. And hopefully you got examples of what that looked like. And hopefully in a healthy family, at least you were never kicked out of that family, no matter what you did. And if you grow up healthy, what's the atmosphere that was in that family at all points? It was an atmosphere of love. Now, let me ask you another question about the family that you were put in. Who put you in that family? Not you. I remember when all of my kids were born, I looked at them and I was like, now you look like an alien for one thing. I'm not quite sure. And I loved them. Listen. But I went, oh, they didn't choose this family. They were put into, you're born into a family. That's the message of Jesus, is that no matter what the family was like, you get put into a family where people are learning to practice love as the way. John says it in his letter, 1 John, he says, see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. Now, that same word there, he's not saying, not God's affection because of something that you did. Like, well, I'm really happy you acted that way. You're moral and pure. I have deep affection for that. It's not God's desire to feel complete, like God needs something. It's God's agape. What great agape. What great self-sacrificial, self-forgetful love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. So you may say, well, I didn't have a great family, and I don't know how to, this is like really, I've been through some stuff, you don't know the things I've been through and the difficulties that I've had. I just want to tell you the gospel is that you can be a part of God's family. And inside that family, you can learn to love. Paul gives us a word of grace at the very end of the letter. He understands what it's like to be a human being who has limitations and doesn't see everything. And he gives this beautiful picture at the very end. Verse 12, he says, for now, listen, we only see a reflection as in a mirror. And in that day, Corinth was famous for its bronze mirrors. And if you can imagine, didn't have mirrors like we have it, you wouldn't quite see exactly, you wouldn't see all the hairs out of place or a blemish. You would be like, I kind of have a sense of what I'm like, I think. He says, we see right now, we don't see the whole picture. He says, but then the day is coming when we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. I understand a part of love. I experience a piece of love. But then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And then that famous last verse that's like a benediction. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is what? Love.
Pastor Scott's message reminded us that love is the direction we need to aim our lives. If you want to take a next step towards love, whether that's loving yourself or loving your neighbor, we want to partner with you. If you want to fill out our Connect card, it allows our staff to get to know you better and be able to reach out to you specifically in your needs. You can fill out that Connect card by scanning the QR code or clicking the link below. We want to partner with you in this way, and we're so excited to see what God does in each of our lives. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.